Fair warnings before today's class. The topic that we're going to cover today is fairly academic. And if you've done economics before, or if you've had like a subject, this is probably something you've covered already. We're going to cover the basics and add on to it a little. So, certain things that they don't really teach you in school but are essential or form the foundations of, they tell you the destination, but they don't tell you how they got there. So we'll be discussing a bit of that. So if someone's not sitting with a notebook sort of thing, someplace where you can write, maybe you can consider doing that. Otherwise also it's fine. I mean, it depends on how you work, but just giving a fair warning, this might get a bit bookish and there might be a bit of information overload also, since the topic is a bit heavy and the content we're going to cover is also heavy in nature. Okay, I hope the screen is visible for everyone. Yeah. So I figured that I can remove the boundaries also. I reviewed the video, yesterday's video, and I see. All right. Okay, we have more people. Great. So I guess people would continue to come in. Shouldn't be a problem. Okay, let's begin. Consumer theory is the topic of our second lecture. Why is it consumer theory? Because, well, who is the end user, right? It's the consumer. Why do we refer to them as not humans or people, but rather consumers in economics? Because naturally, economics is about buying things. As the end user, my role in the in the circle of income is to consume the things and provide labor. So provide labor becomes a separate component. Here what we talk about is how do I make consuming decisions, what goods to buy and not to buy, okay, and the division between them. That's why it's called consumer theory, and this forms the framework of the classical economics part of it. So this is where, how we discussed yesterday, that we'll be talking about the classical economics, then move on to behavioral and then to neuroscience. So this is the first thing. This is the foundation stone of what consumer theory is in classical economics. Okay. Okay. Right. Utility theory. This is the first thing we'll discuss today. If you remember when we discussed rationality, right, and rationality defined in economics, we discussed maximizing satisfaction, utility. Okay. So the way, the technical jargon for how economics allocates satisfaction to a particular person is saying that ice cream provides you with a certain utility. Okay. Now let me ask you a question. Do you think the satisfaction that ice cream can provide you, do you think you can put a number to it? Or how do you measure this utility if it's a technical jargon and we base an entire theory on it? Do you think you can provide a number? Okay, 20 rupees is, or 20 something is the satisfaction that having ice cream gives me. Can you do that?
No, we cannot do that. Like personally, there is not a we can't put a value to it. It has the feeling of satisfaction. There can be put a number to it, according to me.
Right, exactly. You can't put a number to it. So when you put numbers to things, right, when you measure them in discrete values, you refer to them as cardinal values. Okay, that there's a number for everything. Here we see that satisfaction. Okay, and what utility theory depends on, the satisfaction you derive is ordinal in nature, which means that even though you can't say ice cream gives me 20, let's say, utils. Okay, that's a theory that was developed. Okay, so that's the cardinal side of it, but it's not popular. This is what we really consider. Okay, so you can't say okay ice cream is 20 utils, but you can say, all right, between cake and ice cream gives me greater satisfaction as compared to cake, right? That's a comparison we can make. So then we can rank our preferences, and when you can rank our preferences, let's say ice cream is first preference, cake is second, third is, let's say, I don't know, a cheesecake. Okay, So when you can rank these preferences, then your satisfaction becomes ordinal in nature. And that is what the assumption of this consumer theory is, right? And as we move on, you'll realize why it's being ranked. But there's also, after you rank it, there is a way to measure it, and we will talk about that. Okay. The second point with respect to utility theory is the utility function, right? We spoke about maximizing real valued utility functions yesterday, right? What is utility functions? It's a mathematical formulation of different bundles of commodities that you can use that will provide you a certain utility, or that will provide you a certain level of satisfaction. What is different bundles of goods and commodities? That's something we will discuss over the course of today's lecture. But essentially you can understand it by saying that utility function allows you to mathematically formulate that if I had cake and ice cream, then what is the combination of cake and ice cream that will provide me with the greatest satisfaction? So one ice cream, two cake provides me the greatest satisfaction, or four ice cream, five cake, something of that sort. Okay. So you're providing bundles of goods, right? Ice cream, cake together makes a bundle, and that's the utility function. That's how you derive the utility function in a mathematical way. The third is marginal utility. Okay, this is a term that will keep on reappearing, and the marginal sort of measures of different things, right? Marginal cost, marginal revenue, marginal utility are things that are important components of economics as we know it. Because what does it measure? Okay, it measures the additional utility derived from the consumption of one more unit of a commodity, which means if I have one ice cream and I choose to have a second ice cream, then what is the greater satisfaction that I got from having the second ice cream? Okay, what is that difference that's there? Okay, that's important to measure. Why? Because that tells us how much, what is the total increase in marginal utility that we can at least reach. Okay, and then the quantity. Okay, the values of marginal utility that you derive, that also represents certain things. So do you think you have equal marginal utility throughout the consumption of a commodity, right? Imagine hot summers, right? And you've just come from playing and you want water. Okay, the marginal utility or the satisfaction that you derive from the first glass of water is much more than the satisfaction you will derive from having the fourth glass of water. You realize this example is very intuitive, right? In one glass, I'm very thirsty. Okay, so the satisfaction that that one glass provides me is extremely high. Okay, I was extremely thirsty, but by the fourth glass, I just don't want to have water anymore. I'm like, I'm full. Okay, so then the marginal utility that you're deriving from each additional unit goes on declining. Okay, now marginal utility and the values that it takes across the graphs, etc., that we make differs from the theory, etc. So different theories will have different formulations of how marginal utility is predicted to react. Okay, but this the example that I gave will give you a general understanding of what we mean by marginal utility. Okay, then I have this sort of definition which sort of combines and sums up what utility theory is, which is that utility theory bases its beliefs upon individual preferences. So we're back to preferences, right? And what utility theory, what consumer theory, everything that we're going to discuss today is going to be how to um, formalize the preferences that are there. Okay, how to make theories out of the preferences that economists have observed in the natural environment, right? And that is why I asked you for the form that I did, because it shows us your preferences and what you chose in those situations. And that will the results of the form will also come up, and then you'll realize whether you abided by the different axioms and premises that we discussed today or whether you didn't. Okay, so utility theory bases its beliefs upon individuals' preferences. It is a theory postulated in economics to explain behavior of individuals based on the premise that people can consistently rank order their choices depending upon their preferences. So exactly, I think this is a definition that is fairly comprehensible at this point. We talk about individual preferences, we talk about the fact that This is a theory that is meant to define individual behavior. Okay. And then it depends on the premise that this ranking is ordinal, right? You decide your preferences in an ordinal nature. Okay. Preferences. Again, I think it's one of the most important components. And now, okay, let's just ask people, how would you formulate your preferences, or just what do you think when we talk about preferences?
Like yesterday we discussed maximizing my satisfaction. That will be one of my points. Like it will benefit me. That is where I will choose the preference, like the choice to make, which will benefit me personally. The human mind does that. Like it's selfish. We choose something that we want to. Like that's one of the way we choose.
Okay. What else? We even
Something
spoke. Yeah.
like something which is of my top priority right now and I need it. So, keeping that in mind, I'll choose my preferences.
Right. Thank you for that. So there are different factors also which impact preferences. Okay. Today, since we've discussed a bit of preferences tomorrow also, yesterday also, right? Now what we'll be doing is we'll be discussing this formal theory of preferences and the axioms used, right? So this might get a little heavy at some point. So just let me know if you don't understand. Okay. Now we'll get to theory here, right? This is categorizing the strength of preferences. Here, the agenda of today's session is to build up upon the theory that's there, right? Which is why we have to refer to the formal, axioms and postulates that are there. My net is unstable. Okay, seems to be working. If I get cut out at any point, just let me know, okay? Okay. Categorizing strength of preferences. Okay, we spoke about consumption bundles. Let's imagine these consumption bundles on a Cartesian plane, right? So you have two variables, x and y, which illustrate two commodities, two goods that's there. Let's yeah. Okay, two commodities. We consider ice cream and cake. I think that's going to be the example for today. So X and Y are ice cream and commodities, right? Now these are symbols, and why are these symbols important? Because it helps us sort of categorize the preferences that we have. We spoke about that we have to rank them, right? So what are mathematical tools and the sort of categorization that you can do for ranking these preferences? The symbol here that you can see, I can also annotate it, right? Yeah. Okay, the annotation might suck, but well, this symbol that you see here, this is the symbol that we use to denote strict preference. Okay, if you notice, it seems fairly similar to the greater than sign that's there, but it's not the same. Okay, so we use this to denote strict preference. What does strict preference mean? That given ice cream and cake, I will always choose ice cream. There's no competition between the two goods. Okay. So I will strictly choose ice cream irrespective of what the situation is. Okay. Cake will never be chosen in this scenario. That's why it's called strict preference. You're it's strict and there's no if and buts to it. Okay. Um, this term, it denotes indifference. Okay, indifference is something that economists use a lot. Okay, indifference basically means that it doesn't really matter, okay, which one you choose, you equally prefer them. And I think that's something that you might understand in normal terms also, right? Ice cream or cake, whatever works, I'm completely fine with both of them, right? That's where you show indifference. Okay, that the satisfaction that you're probably deriving from both the commodities is almost same to you, so your preferences are indifferent. Okay, these are all of these are technical jargon that's there, so that if someone does ask you, in economic sense, what do you prefer, you can always say, you know what, I'm actually indifferent between x and y. And that's sort of the intuitive understanding that you can get. This is where it gets interesting, right? This has both the symbols. It has the strict preference symbol and it has the indifference symbol. Now this denotes weak preference. Why does it get weak? Because, okay, let's break it down. X and the strict preference, X is strictly preferred over Y, but X is also indifferent with Y. Okay, so you're actually exhibiting both of these behaviors simultaneously. How do you translate that? It means that X is at least as preferred as much as Y. So there can be situations where you will choose ice cream over cake, but there can also be situations where you could choose either ice cream or cake. Okay, so you have a weak preference. You're not hell bent on getting ice cream. You're saying, you know what? If possible, let's say, um, if I had to, provide like a natural example, let's say I have let's say 50 rupees and I could get either ice cream or cake, right? So I say, you know what, I would prefer ice cream because that's what I like more. But given the, let's say, the money that I have, either ice cream or cake, whatever works. Okay, that's where you show a strict preference because you're not hell bent on getting ice cream. Okay, this is the difference that's there. And this formulation is what is the most prevalent, right? And when we talk about your form results, weak preferences is what comes up. Okay, so you'll realize that. Are there any questions on this slide? Okay, the conclusion for this slide is, while I've told you what are the symbols, etc., right? So whenever you if we provide you further readings, so you can interpret it and translate it. So every time you see the symbols, if you see the symbol, you can directly say this means that X is strictly preferred. All right, in any situation I will choose X over Y. Okay, so you can keep on translating this. So as you move on and as you, let's say, start reading more in economics, these symbols will greatly help you. But also, why did I discuss this? I discussed this because this forms the foundation of the assumption that we started off with, that you have to rank your preferences. All right. And this is a way of ranking your preference. So, what economics says is that, okay, someone just, okay. So, what economics says is that you should have the ability to rank all your preferences. At any given point, given any commodity, right, you should be able to tell whether you strictly prefer A over B, whether you're indifferent between A and B, or whether you have a weak preference between A and B. There can be no commodity or there can be no situation where you say, you know what, I don't really know. Economics doesn't see that. So you need to have a particular preference, and which is why it's important to understand how these preferences are ranked. Okay. And now, since I've started talking about assumptions, let's move on to the. Do I have to? Okay. Right. Since I started talking about, preferences, these are assumptions now. Okay. Assumptions are a better word to use, as I've used here, is axioms. So, what are axioms essentially? They're considered as um, factors, or the axioms, if I had to translate in general, let's say general definition of axioms, is basically they're considered truths. Okay, you assume them that they hold no matter what. These three things that I mentioned here, these are called axioms of preferences, etc., because of the fact that if you want to create a utility function, right, if you want to plot your preferences, then these are conditions that your preferences must meet. Okay, if your preferences don't match or violate any of these axioms, then you can't create a utility function. And if you can't create a utility function, then naturally, by definition of what economics has currently, right, all of these things, the classical definitions of economics, right, economics would say the decisions that you're making are irrational because they're not following the rational assumptions that economics has to work with. All right, we have three major. Okay. Yeah, we have three major assumptions here, right? Completeness, reflexive, and transitivity. Okay, what is each of them? And these are important, right? If you're important, right? And when you go on, right? So in college level, when you do microeconomics again, if you choose to do it, okay, these are called axioms of preference bundling also. So as we spoke about bundles, right? We spoke bundles are the commodities that you choose, right? And preferences are how you're choosing between different goods. So these are called axioms of preference bundling because they define, let's say, the way, or they define the rules in which you can make preference bundles, all right? And the rules that these rules should be followed by the bundles that are formulated. Okay, the first thing is completeness. Okay, okay, I have all of these three written here. Is there someone who just wants to, let's say, take a guess at what these mean, and then I can elaborate on why they're important and why they're here? Anyone?
Can you repeat your question? I didn't hear you well.
Just generally, what do you understand by completeness, or if you can interpret the equation that's given here?
Uh, uh, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but according to the symbol, like the equal symbol is showing, so it can show us that both A and B can be compared, and they are equally, like they are equal. They will give us equal satisfaction or something because it is using the indifferent sign.
All right. What else? Someone else? If, what do they understand by completeness here?
I think according to the equation that are given, I think it's like some things that can be compared at all levels, like every
Mhm.
level. Like it says, it can be compared. It can be greater, it can be lesser, or it is equally preferred. Like
Mm,
in a whole scale, you can compare those two bundles.
right, exactly. So what it means is, why does it have all the three scenarios, right? It has all the three scenarios and it's known as completeness because because of what I was talking about earlier, that it has to be complete. So you can't have a situation where you don't make a preference, all right? Any two bundles can be compared. Any two bundles can be compared and we should be able to compare them at all levels. All right. So if I've given you two commodities, you have to tell me which one you prefer or if you're indifferent about them, but it's important to categorize them. So that's what completeness refers to, that your preferences are complete in nature. All right. There can't be any inconsistency between the preferences that you have. The inconsistency we'll also talk about in transitivity. Okay. Reflexiveness. So reflexiveness here is also referred to as the sanity, the axiom of sanity. Why is that, right? If you see here, they've compared the same bundle. Okay, and it says any bundle is at least as good as itself. Okay, so if you're choosing between ice cream and ice cream is at least as good as ice cream. Okay, because otherwise, if if you can't even compare ice cream, right, then there's no equality of sanity that's there. So this entire principle, I think it's by, I don't remember the person, but very famous economist, and he talks about this reflexiveness is spoken about as the axiom of sanity. That this is a basic assumption that has to be there. Ice cream, you have to be indifferent between at least comparing two ice creams, right? Not flavors. I'm not bringing flavors as a variable into the picture, okay? But it has to be there because otherwise, all your preferences will be haywire. Okay. This is why it's called the axiom of sanity. And I'll probably provide you with more readings on it, and I'm not being able to do justice to explaining why it's intuitive also, but it's also mind blowing at the same time. Because how do you compare ice cream to ice cream, right? How do you compare the same commodity in real life? But it's also like 2 is equal to 2, right? 2 can't be equal to 3. It's obvious. It's so obvious. So, and they've really just stated it here. Okay, and it's called the axiom of sanity. So we'll let you know about it. But this is the second assumption that's there, that any bundle is at least as good at itself. So you will have to choose that bundle if there is, let's say, no better bundles that are provided. third one that we have is transitivity. Okay, this is where inconsistency mainly comes into place. If I've chosen apples over bananas, and then I choose, um, if I choose apples over bananas, then I choose bananas over oranges, then I will be choosing apples over oranges. See, if A is preferred over B, B is preferred over C, then naturally I have to prefer A over C. This is the transitivity thing. So you can't be inconsistent. So suppose where would inconsistency come into place? If let's say I chose A is preferred over B, B is preferred over C, but C is preferred over A. Okay, if this was reversed here, okay, that would be inconsistent. But do you think, like, with respect to choices, right, and with respect to preferences, even apples, oranges, and bananas, do you think we can actually follow this? Or are there situations where we violate this principle of transitivity? Anyone could go ahead. Guys, I know it's a bit heavy, but it'll be
Since
great if
there
someone could answer.
since there are different goods like apple, banana, and oranges are completely different, so you can't really compare each of them to the other, right? So that's where it like messes things up.
Yes, exactly. Because there's so many factors, right? What if I just love orange and that's why I will choose orange irrespective? Okay. But if I had to choose between apples and bananas and oranges, okay, then I choose apple over banana and oranges and banana over oranges. But I've never compared apples and oranges, right? And they're completely different. So then what if I do choose oranges? Why does economics make me irrational at that point? So transitivity is the principle. So when we start talking about behavioral economics, right? Transitivity is the principle that's most frequently violated because this entire flow of logic that has to be there. You do this logic in maths also, right? But this flow of logic is doesn't work with human beings most of the times, and that's what we'll talk about. Okay, so these are three principles. These axioms are provided so that we can create the utility function. So let's say your particular preferences can actually be graphed, like made an equation out of. Okay, then they have to at least satisfy these three equations to be graphed, and I'll show you the graphs that are formed. All right. All right. There are two additional axioms that we should talk about it, and these are also counter. These are very intuitive in nature. Um, Monotonic preferences, which is that more is always preferred to less. All right, which is why when we talk about indifference curves, all right, and which is exactly how you plot your preference bundles, right? You assume that more is always preferred to less, and that's why as you move above indifference curves, your level of satisfaction is increasing. But more always preferred to less? Is there no? And then there's non-satiety, okay, which is that consumers do not have not reached the level of satisfaction. At least that's what we assume when we initially start making utility functions, right? We spoke about marginal utility, and we spoke about as you increase units that you consume, there is a natural point where your marginal utility being derived from each additional unit does begin to decline, right? But at this point, what we're assuming is that even if it is declining, you're not saturated. Okay, so it doesn't your marginal utility is not reaching zero at any point in time, while for the purposes of the indifference curve, right? Okay, yeah. Can anyone think of examples where more is not preferred to less? Could be anyone, guys. Okay, all right. let's just do this. You can come back to me with examples of where more is not preferred to less. And I think, as we discussed, things like charity and stuff like that. Charity doesn't hold here, obviously. I'm not talking about that. But what I'm saying is, I think you guys will eventually reach to the examples that I'm looking out for. And it's also a great read, okay? Okay, now we're at the big things. Indifference curves. If someone's done microeconomics in school, they've probably been acquainted to indifference curves, right? Indifference curves form the sort of basis of consumer theory as we know it currently. What are indifference curves? There's a graph here, and I think that works fairly well for everyone to understand what indifference curves are. So these lines that you're seeing, right, this curve that's there, this curve is referred to as an indifference curve. Okay, and you're seeing quantity of orange on the y-axis and quantity of apple on the x-axis, right? What are these points A and B doing? All of these points correspond to different bundles. Okay, we've been talking about bundles, so I hope that's very clear. It refers to different bundles that's there. So A represents 1 unit of apple and 4 units of orange. Okay. B corresponds to 2 units of apple and 3 units of oranges, and so on. So you've plotted 4 bundles, right? But why do they lie on one indifference curve? What is the logic behind it? And the fact is that indifference curves refers to the graphical representation of alternate combinations of bundles, right? But also where the consumer is indifferent. What does that mean? It means that on this curve, right? On this curve we're talking about, I think it says I1. On this curve, at every point A, B, C, D, the level of satisfaction that the consumer is getting is equal, which is why the consumer is indifferent amongst them. Okay, so at A, let's say if I had to measure, let's say this amount of satisfaction I'm getting is 20 something, 20 utils. Okay, so at A, B, C, D, the value of satisfaction that I'm getting is equal, which is why I'm indifferent amongst these bundles. All right. So what and why is it like an increasing thing? Why do we have like more than one bundle here? Because we say that as let's say because we say that more is preferred to less, right? We have monotonic preferences and there's non-CETT. So there's no end goal, right? I could probably, let's say, draw an indifference curve that's even here. This could be a I5. Excuse me for the beautiful drawing, but yeah, so basically you keep on increasing because the consumer has not reached a level of satisfaction, and higher indifference curves will always be preferred to lower ones because a higher indifference curve represents a higher level of satisfaction. But on the indifference curve, the level of satisfaction that you're getting is equal. All right. So these are indifference curve. This refers to an indifference map where you're plotting more than one indifference curve. So an entire family of indifference curves together representing different levels of satisfaction given different bundles, right? If let's say I were to take this point here, okay, this will probably be 1 unit of apples, but match up to 6 units of oranges. So it's giving me a greater satisfaction because while the quantity of apple has not declined, the quantity of oranges has increased. It's a Pareto superior allocation to make. Let's not go into what Pareto superior allocation is, but essentially it means that you're better off without any other component being worse off. So on average, this is a better position to be in than this. Everything is increased and your satisfaction has also increased. So all points on this indifference curve 2 provides a greater level of satisfaction than indifference curve 1. All right, are there any questions with respect to what indifference curves are? We will be building up on it now. Okay, great. Also, Gia, I can't see anyone. So if there's like someone who does, let's say,
Right, right, okay.
okay. Next, we have marginal rate of substitution, right? Marginal rate of substitution is just a second. My laptop has, I can't erase. Okay. Okay, marginal rate of substitution is how you measure the values across the indifference curve, right? So marginal rate of substitution refers to the rate at which one commodity is substituted with the other. Okay, so if you see this, if this is A, right, and the next position you're going at is B, so then this is the difference in commodity Y. That's why there's a change in Y here. This is the change in commodity X. That's why there's a change in X. So when you write change in Y upon change in X, that gives you the marginal rate of substitution across this graph. Okay, but marginal rate of substitution is also not constant throughout, right? If you can see, change in Y over change in X is much greater when you're moving from A to B, but it reduces as you go on. So here from D to C, the value of Y in X gets on smaller. So the marginal rate of substitution is not constant throughout the slope, it keeps on changing. And the law that corresponds to it is law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. So I think this is pretty visible, right? Here, the value that you have of change in Y over change in X is much greater than the value that you have here. Okay, but why is this so? Why is there a diminishing law of marginal rate of substitution? Anyone could like basically think or take a guess. Why do we see this sort of graph? I hope everyone's
Um,
at least listening. Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I'm just deriving this from an example that you had already told us in this class. You gave us an example of being in a desert and then wanting water. So when you take the first sip of water, as you said, you will feel more amount of satisfaction than when you take the second sip of water. And after some time, you'll feel like you've had enough. So apparently your satisfaction will start to reduce, because at the first you will feel more satisfied, the second sip of water will give you less satisfaction, and the third will give you even more less. So I think that is why it is declining. I'm not sure.
No. So the logic that you have is absolutely right. Okay. But in this example, you only have one commodity, right? Your commodity is only water. Okay. So your logic is right. Now, what we'll do is we'll use that logic and convert it into a situation where we have two goods, but the logic remains the same. Okay. So when you just have, let's say, one commodity of X, 1 unit of X, but approximately, I think this looks like a 13 units of Y. What is more precious to you? One commodity of Y or one commodity of X?
Can you just repeat?
If you're at this position, right? Let's say this is 13 units of Y and you have 1 unit of X. And you want to get an additional unit of X. Okay, one more unit of X. You want to move to unit 2. Okay, so what is more valuable to you? Is it going to be easier to sacrifice Y to get an additional unit of X? Or is it going to be difficult?
Difficult for sure.
All right. It's actually easier to sacrifice why when you have such a huge commodity, right? Let's say I have a lot of rice. Okay, if I have 5 kgs of rice, or let's think about money. If I have 1 lakh rupees, okay, then it's easier to give 10 rupees to a person who's, let's say, um, not well off. And then that 10 rupees matters more to the person I gave it to than the 10 rupees matters to me, because I'm starting at 1 lakh. But let's say now I've given so much money to everyone that I have 10,000 rupees. Okay. Now, when I have 10,000 rupees and I have to give 10 rupees to someone, will that hurt me more than the 1 lakh and 10 rupees example? Or will it hurt me more now when I just have 10,000 and I'm giving 10 rupees to someone else? You see? So because we at this point, right, at A, we have greater quantities of Y and a lesser quantity of X, then it's easier to sacrifice Y to gain an additional unit of X because X is more precious to us at this point. Okay, that's what is happening at A. But at this point, at D, what is happening is you're almost at 4 units of y and you're at 4 units of x. At this point, you're much less willing to give an additional or sacrifice additional unit of y to gain additional units of x, which is why the change in y has now declined. Does that make sense for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, this is how it works. All right. So as you go on, okay, as y is decreasing, y is becoming more precious to you, and that is why the total change in y is declining. And what does this result in? This results in a diminishing. I've written marginal utility. That's wrong. It's marginal rate of substitution. Okay. Law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. So your substitution rate, which is change in y over change in x, is declining over this, and this also results in a downward slope. All right, and that's fairly intuitive from the figure that we have here. So that's essentially the basis, and this is how you measure the slope of the indifference curve. And the slope of the indifference curve is very important because it's used to um, reach to a lot of inferences. You get a lot of insight about what the consumer feels or behaves with respect to the two commodities given you. All right. Okay. Then we move on to properties of indifference curves, right? Property indifference curves are always convex to the origin. Let's go here. Convex is then you have like a outward C shape. All right. So you convex to the origin here. Concave would be when it was, yeah, this is concave. Okay, when you're facing towards sort of like a cave sort of shape. Okay, the back side of the spoons examples that we get in school. So this is concave, and this sort of figure would be concave to the origin. This is like bent like a C, and this is convex to the origin. It's convex to the origin because of the diminishing marginal rate of substitution, because of the fact that we see that these differences between change in y and change in x is not equal. All right, indifference curves slope downwards follows a similar thing, right? Along all of these things, as y keeps on decreasing, y is becoming more precious to us, and which is why it's downward sloping. Higher indifference curves represent higher level of satisfaction. This is something we discussed in this graph, right? um, Necessarily a point on I2 or a point, oh my god, okay. Necessarily a point in I2 or a point on I3 is a greater bundle, right? You get more of both apples and oranges. So the level of satisfaction that you're deriving goes on increasing as you move to higher indifference curves. And indifference curves can never intersect. Why do you think that is so? Why do you think indifference curves can never intersect?
Because as we go higher, the other curve which is higher has like a
Your voice is breaking for me. Okay, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear her, or is this
No,
like
I think she was having connectivity issues. She's left the meeting right now.
all right? Anyone else who would like to answer this? I mean, we're short on time, so I'll just have to like hurry with this. All right. Indifference curves cannot intersect because every indifference curve represents a different level of satisfaction, right? And on that indifference curve, the level of satisfaction is constant. So if I1 and I2 were intersecting, this would mean that there's a point, the point of intersection, where your levels of satisfaction are clashing. All right. If I should have added a figure here. So they're intersecting, which means that there might be a point here where you're coming from two different indifference curves, so your level of satisfaction has to be different. But there's a point where those indifference curves are intersecting, and it clashes with the assumptions that we're working with. That there's transitivity, or that one indifference curve only has a consistent level of satisfaction. So there can't be a bundle where you're getting both more satisfaction and less satisfaction. All right, which is why indifference curves cannot intersect.
I have a doubt.
Yeah.
So when it intersects, you're telling that it cannot have like more satisfaction as well as less satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
Like, why doesn't it mean that you have an equal satisfaction throughout?
Okay. See this. This is one indifference curve. This is another indifference curve. Can you see my drawing?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So now, where is this starting? This is on a higher plane. This is supposed to be on a lower plane here, right? But what is happening by you come here? This becomes on a higher plane. This goes to a lower plane. Okay. So if I have point A that is providing me with a less, and let's say a point A prime, if I compare my level of satisfaction at point A and point A prime, then A prime provides a greater level of satisfaction. But let's say if I have a point B prime, no, B, sorry, this is the second, and B prime, then my level of satisfaction has declined. This is C, if you can, this is one indifference curve. Okay. Do you see the problem here? It should have the same level of satisfaction throughout. And a higher indifference curve always represents a greater level of satisfaction. But here, and these 2 points should be, the consumer is indifferent across these 2 points. But if I draw the figure here, right, and if indifference curves are intersecting, then the level of satisfaction that A prime is providing to me is greater than the level of satisfaction that B prime is providing to me, because I can naturally see when I plot the bundles.
Oh, okay, I got it.
You see, it conflicts logically, which is why indifference curves don't intersect. And excuse me for the beautiful drawing. I mean, okay, so the properties are there. Budget line, right? What is budget line? Budget line is essentially plotting the income that's there, that you have, and it's called the budget line because you're plotting it against the prices of the different commodities. So I have 20 rupees, ice cream is 2 rupees, and cake is 5 rupees. So then what are different combinations? So it's 2x plus 5y is equal to 20. That becomes my equation. Okay. X refers to the units of uh, ice cream. Y refers to the units of cake. All right. And so what are the different combinations or different bundles that I can make that will allow me to buy the maximum units of the two commodities given the income that I have? All right. Which is why if you see, budget lines are always linear in nature. Okay. It's a direct straight line. So if you see if you see, you can see the budget that's there, the price for movies and the price for t-shirts, which is why it's movies are approximately at 5.5. Across the line, these are different bundles. So you can have one t-shirt and 4 movies, two t-shirt and 3 movies, and so on. And then you reach the other extreme where you have 4.5 t-shirts and 0 movies. So this is the budget line. And the constraint is that you're limited by the income that we have given the prices of the commodities that you're working with. All right. Okay. Now we've told you income and we've told you preferences. How do we come to an equilibrium? Given these components, these become our ingredients. Now what we have to do is the process. We combine these in order to reach the equilibrium, right? How do I decide what is the best bundle for me given the constraints that I have? So this process is also called constrained utility maximization, because we're talking about a consumer here and maximizing the utility given certain constraints. All right. If you can do this entire thing, and there's an entire different theory on it for firms, and that's referred to as constrained profit maximization. All right. So here, this line from P to T, this line from P here to T here, this linear line is the budget constraint. So it shows that this is the level of income I have. Anything below the budget constraint is obviously feasible for me. It's obviously something I can afford, right? I don't have to spend the 200 rupees or 500 rupees that I earn. I can spend less than it, right? But to maximize it, we assume that the consumer has no spending. Consumer has no savings. That's the assumption that you take in microeconomics, right? So if I were to use my entire income, then this is the line that I make, PT. And my ideal consumption would be at a point where I'm maximizing the utility given my income, right? So now what we're doing is we superimpose the indifference curves we've made for different preferences, right, across X and Y. And then we look at the point where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line that's there. So if you see here, the point C, this is the point where the indifference curve is directly tangent to my budget line. Okay, what does tangent mean? That it's a point. So there's actually like a 90 degrees here. Okay, you're just touching it, there's no intersection. Okay, this is the one point of contact. And what is happening here is this is the exact point where your utility is maximized given the income that's there. Okay. And so across these bundles, I would say whatever quantity is at C for good X and good Y is where there is consumer equilibrium. And I have no incentive to be changing to any other point. I would not change to R, all right, because because position R represents a lower level of satisfaction. It corresponds to a lower indifference curve. Similarly, I cannot change to U because it is outside my budget line. All right. So point U is not affordable to me. I don't have the money to reach to a greater level of satisfaction. So this is the entire mechanism that we talk about. If there are any questions, I'll take, because I have to move on to the next one. Time's almost over. All right. Then the final theory that we talk about is revealed preference theory. When you plot these when you plot these indifference curves, right, it naturally tells what your preferences are. So there are two theories that sort of come from revealed preference theory, which is the weak axiom of revealed preferences and the strong axiom of revealed preferences. This essentially says that if both A and B are affordable, sometimes A is chosen and sometimes B, right? This is what we spoke about earlier while we were defining the different preferences. And when you actually plot that on the indifference curves, and you can notice this behavior that both A and B are, even if both A and B are affordable, there are certain situations where A is chosen and certain situations where B is chosen, then the consumer is exhibiting the weak axiom of revealed preferences. So the preferences in general are weak, and the theory that is corresponding to it is weak axiom of revealed preferences. Similarly, if both A and B are affordable, right, and still I choose A always over B, then that's the strong axiom of revealed preference. So this is directly corresponding and directly derived from the preferences that we discussed earlier. But in this example, why does this become a theory, so to say? Because we're keeping the indifference curves in mind, and there are entire equations for strong axiom of revealed preferences and weak axiom of revealed preferences. Okay, finally, the form results, right? I think this is it's exactly 10:30. But the questions that everyone got was apple versus banana, banana versus orange, and oranges versus apple. And it was really interesting to see the form results because of the different permutations and combinations that we saw. And there was literally no one who had an inconsistent behavior, which is that no one chose, if someone chose apple over banana, they didn't end up choosing oranges over apple. Okay, so that didn't happen. So most of the people who answered had consistent answers. All right, but why do I say 50% had consistent answers? 50% of the people exhibited the strong axiom of revealed preferences. That if um, apple is over banana, banana is over oranges, then apple is over oranges. That's your strong axiom, right? Because you have a strict preference across all of these things. Okay. And 50% had interesting answers because some people chose apples over banana, oranges over banana, and then oranges over apple. Okay. So even though you had to choose it in the form, what do we get here? We get that if I'm comparing your preferences to banana, I'm choosing apple over banana and I'm choosing oranges over banana. So if there were formula equations for it, right, and if I'm plotting it, then I would say that there is a high possibility that you're actually indifferent between apples and oranges because that's what the logic would say. But you're choosing oranges over apples as well. So you see, it's an interesting formulation because you can practically see people um, make the different preferences that they do make. I just really like oranges. I'm going to choose oranges irrespective. And this is where you can practically see whether you have strong preferences over certain things, whether you're indifferent about certain things, or whether there's a weak preference over certain things. That given apples and oranges, if I compare both of them to banana, I'm choosing apples and oranges. But there are situations where I might choose oranges over apples, or there's a weak preference between them, right? At, that apples are at least as preferred as oranges, if not less. And that was sort of the interesting conclusion that we got from the form. And I hope that you can sort of relate the answers that you have to give to the form in the discussion that we had today. So it was a heavy discussion that we had today, and we've also sort of exceeding our time. So that's done. If there are any questions, do reach out to us. What I'll leave you with is again questions to think about as we meet next week. Is more is always better? And that's something I really hope that people can come up with. Second, are your choices actually always calculated? We did this entire thing, right? Plotting indifference curves, then plotting budget sets, and then combining the two to reach an equilibrium. But do you do those calculations? And even if you don't do such elaborate calculations, what are calculations that you do? And can we discuss that? Okay. What are metrics that you take into account? And the third thing is, are you completely informed about making a choice before you make the choice? Okay. All of these things, they assume that you have complete knowledge, right? You have complete knowledge about your own choices. Do I really know if I like oranges over apple or do I not know? So that is one thing. And the second thing is also complete information about how other agents are acting. All right. Are the prices going to remain constant? Income levels, other stuff, right? So, do you have complete information about this entire mechanism that we're working on? So, these are questions that I will leave you all with, and we'll be providing you with the recording and the summary PDF. And I hope everyone got all of those things. And that's about it. Are there any questions today? Okay, all right. I hope it didn't get like very heavy, but it's necessary because we have to build the foundation before we begin to question things. No other questions then? All right, guys, then you're free to leave. See you on Saturday.
I just wanted to remind everyone I've sent a link on your emails for joining the WhatsApp group, so please join that as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you
Okay,
so much,
thank you
guys. See you.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.